Relationships. The first week we discussed getting past our past. We have to let go of certain things in our past in order to move forward. Week 2 we learned about how to raise the value of your relationships. Pastor Russ and I tag-teamed that sermon, and it had to do with appreciating others and building them up. The third sermon in the series asked us the question, how's your hearing? What, you may say. That week was about being a better listener. Week 4 begged the question, got friends? This was a sermon about having a good friend to share with and be challenged by when needed. It was a sermon to get us thinking about who we could depend on during the toughest times. This morning we are going to hear a story that some of us may have heard before and some of us may not remember. The story comes from the second book of Kings and is found in chapter 5, verses 1 through 19. Let's hear the story. Now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of the master and highly regarded because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now the bands from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. "By all means go," the king of Aram replied. "I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, "With this letter I am sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy." As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, "Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send me someone to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me?" When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message, "Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to him, "Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed." But Naaman went away angry and said, "I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord, his God, wave his hand over the spot and cure me of leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than any of the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed?" So he turned and went off in a rage. Naaman's servants went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet has told you to do some great thing, would you have not done it? How much more then when he tells you, 'Wash and be cleansed'?" So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. Please accept now a gift from your servant." The prophet answered, "As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing." And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. "If you will not," said Naaman, "please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. But may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, he is leaning on my arm, and I bow there also. When I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this. Go in peace, Elijah said. It's quite a story. If you read the rest of the story, it gets even more interesting. But that's another sermon on another day. In 2 Kings, Naaman had turned and went away in a rage, and his officers tried to reason with him. And they said, if he would have given you something difficult, wouldn't you have done it? If Elijah would have said, climb the mountain and go to the other side and bring me back a daisy that I can use to heal you with, he probably would have done it. But he started arguing about, my rivers are cleaner than the Jordan. Why wouldn't I want to go there? And as we read this, we have to think, don't we sometimes make things more difficult than they have to be? Yes. It's difficult because we see impossible situations. To us, it's impossible. How can I ever get through this or by it or around it? I can't understand it. Moses answered God in Exodus 3:11 by saying, but why me? What makes you think I could ever go to Pharaoh and lead the children of Israel out of Egypt? In Luke 18, Jesus says, what men find possible is perfectly possible with God. And in Mark 9, verse 23, and Jesus said to him, if you can, all things are possible for one who believes. As we look at today's society, it seems to me that people think they are entitled to things that a lot of us think we should work for. If you want my help doing something, what's in it for me? If I don't like what you're doing, I'll sue you. I'm not sure if people see things as impossible or just say they don't want to deal with things. If I don't want to deal with something, I'll just quit and go do something else. I'm not sure how you grew up, but I'll tell you one thing. If I said, I want to play baseball this summer, I was told, you can play baseball. Don't ever think about quitting, because what you start, you're going to finish. It was so great because one summer we went on vacation and my dad was kind of getting tired of camping, and he said, I think we should pack up and go home. I was a very wise freshman in high school who said, everyone's having fun, and you always told us if we start something, we should finish it. We actually finished the week at the campground, and I didn't get killed over it. But I made his words come back to him. If I had to quit something because it was a conflict of interest or because I had something else that was going to overlap it, it was my responsibility to go and tell the person that I had to quit that I was going to be leaving the situation, and this is my reasoning why. Today, parents will take care of that for their kids, and will go up and, make sure that it's all taken care of. We don't accept responsibility some days. Look what happened with Irma. I feel like most of us were prepared for the worst. We didn't get it as bad as other parts. Imagine being on one of the small islands in the Atlantic and absolutely having no way to get off the island as this gigantic hurricane is coming at you. Those of us around here may have been inconvenienced, but I think most of us still have our homes and our loved ones. When it comes to our relationships, do you ever see impossible situations there? Do any of you have a friend that sometimes just drives you up the wall? Sometimes you might see the phone ring and you're like, oh no, it's them. I can't answer it right now. I'm not in the mood. I'm sure that happens a lot when I call you. It's not that funny, but don't you just want to ignore them at times? And don't you wonder, what if you're the only person that they have to talk to?
Amen. Right. Amen.
What if you're the only person that checks in on that person?
Right.
I remember calling my grandma Susie when she was in her 70s, and I asked her, what did you do today? And she said, I went to visit the old folks at the nursing home. Okay, Grandma, I'm glad you did. But she knew visits to those people were important. For them to have a conversation with someone, for them it may be impossible to have a conversation with a friend or a family member if nobody goes to see them.
Right. Right.
But Grandma made their day every time she went to visit. And she made my day every time she would tell me she went to see the old people. Because, you know, then I was mature in my 30s, thought she was old, so it was interesting. But God can make the impossible possible. If God is the only relationship we have, is that a bad thing? Probably not. Naaman was given a simple task from God via the prophet Elisha. Go to the Jordan and dip yourself 7 times. For someone dealing with leprosy, something you feel is impossible to get rid of, wouldn't you want to at least try what God has as a cure? Naaman's entourage told him, if Elisha would have given you something hard to do, you know you wouldn't have hesitated. Our second point this morning is we forget or don't know who our God is. We know that there are those that don't know God. But how easy is it to forget about God? To me, once I know God, I don't know that I can forget Him. I might ignore Him. I might try and think He's not there, but I can't get away from that. Because God's always there for us.
Amen. Right.
How many of us try hard to make something right or get something to happen, and when we fail, we then turn to God? I'm guilty. Why don't we look to Him first and foremost? How much easier life would be if we didn't try to do things on our own all the time. Give it to God and watch what happens.
Amen.
One day the little girl said to her mistress, I wish my master would go see the prophet in Samaria. He would help him deal with his leprosy. This little girl was a part of Elisha's people and was stolen and taken to now be the little maiden or whatever she would be called of Naaman's wife. So she was her slave. She was kind-hearted enough to say that his disease can be cured. She loved God and wanted those she worked for to know and understand Him too. She tells Naaman's wife about the prophet, and because of her love for others and for God, Naaman gets healed. Isaiah says, have you never heard, have you never understood? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of all the earth. He never grows weak or weary. No one can measure the depths of his understanding. He gives power to the weak and strength to the powerless. Even youths will become weak and tired, and young men will fall in exhaustion. But those who trust in the Lord will find new strength. They will soar high on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. It's one of my favorite scriptures. I heard this week about 3 or 4 times, I need a vacation from urban now. It's exhausting when we prepare for a hurricane or a storm of any sort. When we're fighting an illness or whatever it is, it wears us down. And then we need a vacation from all that worry and stress. It's easy to say, but for some, that is so hard to do. On Sunday night, I went to bed at 10:30. And I thought, if I can get 1 hour's sleep before this gigantic windstorm comes and wakes me out of bed, because every weatherman I watched said it will keep you awake. And when I woke up at 6:30 a.m., it felt so good, and I felt so refreshed. How was it? It was in God's hands. And if the noise woke me up and I had to go to the closet, I would have been ready. But I slept, and it was so peaceful. The more we lean on Him, the more He will help us soar and to run, to not grow weary or faint. Hebrews 11:6 reminds us, and without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to Him must believe that He exists and that He rewards those who earnestly seek Him.
Amen. Right.
I have to get a drink before I go any further. My morning meds, if I don't have a drink, if you watch me, I'll be drinking while Russ is preaching, because my mouth goes dry. I apologize, but our third thought for today is we doubt rather than trust. When we doubt God rather than trust Him, life can get real tough. When we are in the habit of trusting Him, doubt can easily take a back seat to what we are trying to accomplish. As we build relationships with those around us, if we really want them to be successful, that person needs to know where each of us stands in our faith life. If you are trusting God and you really rely on Him, then your friends will see that in you and will most likely want to start behaving that way too. But as we heard the word faith, faith requires action. And Naaman was healed when he did what Elisha told him to do. Naaman had faith in what Elisha said. He just didn't want to go where he said to go to get the job done. He wanted to stay close to home where the water was cleaner. But without the action of going to the Jordan and dipping himself 7 times, he would have never gotten his condition cleared up. In James 2:14 we read, "What good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but don't show it by your actions? Can that kind of faith save anyone?" Our next slide talks about how do I relieve stress in my life, and I reworded this to, I am saying this as, how do I deal with difficult situations? The first thing that we do is we can accept Christ as our Savior. When I have Christ in my life, I don't need anything else.
Amen.
But part of my role as a Christ follower is to introduce others to Jesus.
Right.
So once I've accepted Him, I need to share Him with everyone.
Amen.
The second point is to believe God has all the power you need. As I just said, I don't need anything else once I have God in my heart. I could have hundreds of friends and family, and if they chose to turn and walk away and never be my friend again, it doesn't matter. I have God and I don't need another thing.
Thank you.
Our third thing is we confess our weaknesses. God says, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weakness, so that the power of Christ can work through me. Coming from 2 Corinthians. When we finally admit to God, I don't know how to do this, or will you help me to do that? We are admitting our weaknesses. When we confess that we can't do it on our own, God will make a way for us. I read about a lady this week that was struggling with attitudes of her children, but especially the two youngest that she and her husband had adopted. At one point, she got frustrated. She went to her room and she fell back against the bedroom door and just spoke to God. God, you know I love mothering these children, but right now I'm having a little trouble acting as if I do. Something needs to change in our family, and it's going to take your help. She confessed. She needed help, and she reached out. Without missing a beat, God responded. He brought to mind several lovely things that had happened that very day. She took out an old chalkboard and created the brag board. A family meeting was held, and a new rule went into place. When someone in the family does something good, you write it on the board. You are not allowed to write it about yourself. Things began to change. Then mealtime became a positive moment and not a time to tell it on each other. They began encouraging each other, and the fighting and picking on each other almost disappeared. I thought about this from the standpoint of the church. What if we had chalkboards outside these doors that went all the way to the front door? And we started writing positive things. Now, we have yellow cards that we're supposed to, write about prayers that have been answered. But what if we wrote something that we saw someone do and made a positive thing out of that, and people start reading that? Maybe our attitudes as a church start to change. We're building each other up and not tearing each other down. What if those who might leave today saying, Pastor Gary was pretty bold about talking about giving today, would say to each other, I'm glad Pastor Gary reminded us today that about our covenant with the church and our covenant with God that we committed to when we became members of this church. This lady admitted her weakness to God, and immediately God responded. Our last fill in the blank today is, do what you know. Rather than focusing on what we don't know about God, focus on what we do know about Him. We have to stop questioning God and start doing what He asks us to do. If you are one who keeps doing things your way and not God's way, let me ask you, how is that working for you? I know how it is for me when I'm doing that and not going to God first. It doesn't work well most of the time. To have healthy relationships, we have to put God first. When we are good with God, we will begin to be good with more and more things in our lives. Let us pray. Gracious God, we know we should come to you in everything. Our joys, our worries, our concerns, the task that's ahead of us. We need to come to you first. Ask your advice. And then how much easier our lives would be when it's in your hands first. Father, forgive us when we beat our heads against the wall trying to figure out how to get something done, and then we wait to turn to you at the last minute. I know you just smile and help us along the way, but I'm sure that some days it's got to be frustrating to you. And Father, when we're building strong relationships, we have to be that example of you in everything we do. As our friends see Jesus in our hearts and in our actions, how much easier our friendships and how much deeper our friendships can become. How much more we can do, how many more friends we can bring to you if they see you in each and every one of us. Father, we love you and just thank you for being in our lives. And Father, may we this morning remember that you should always, always be first. In Jesus' holy name, amen.